I want to talk about New Zealand. They had a very interesting thing happen this week that I did not see make many headlines on this side of the planet. But basically, on Wednesday, New Zealand released a 3,000-page report detailing the results of a 6-year investigation into uh, it was completed by a group called the Abuse in Care Royal Commission. Basically, a top of the line, we're going to do an investigation about child abuse, the abuse of vulnerable adults who are in care of government agencies or religious agencies. And there had been so many stories festering about, vulnerable people, victims of abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, that several years ago they said, fine, we're going to do an actual, real, big time investigation. Took them 6 years. They just released the findings, and the takeaways are just devastating all around. Here is the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon. This is what he said after the report was released here. Let me show you this. This is a dark and sorrowful day in New Zealand's history as a society and as a state. We should have done better, and I am determined that we will do so. I mean, it's bad when the prime minister's saying something like that. In short, what the report found was that about 200,000 people were abused over the course of about 70 years, which was the range of this investigation from like 1950 to 2020. And they said 200,000 people have been victims of this abuse. This is in a country, New Zealand, that only has like a population of 5 million people. So that's a huge, huge percentage. And many of the organizations, state run, faith based, they got away with it because of this overwhelming lack of oversight. Let me show you this article from the Associated Press here, because they had some interesting things to say about all this. Here we go. If I could pull this up and get rid of all these ads. Here we go. The results were a national disgrace. This is in the report. Of 650,000 children and vulnerable adults in state, foster, and church care between those years, in a country that has a population of 5 million, nearly a third endured physical, sexual, verbal, or psychological abuse. Many more were exploited or neglected. Further down here, the figures were likely higher. Complaints were disregarded and records were lost and destroyed. These gross violations occurred at the same time as New Zealand was promoting itself internationally and domestically as a bastion of human rights and as a safe, fair country in which to grow up as a child in a loving family. Like, holy crap. Even no one's reading this report and saying, nope, fake, it's all lies. They're all like, we've missed this. We needed to do better. We failed everybody. One of the other things they found in the report is that they calculated the average cost of abuse for survivors. Like, if you were a victim of sexual or psychological or whatever abuse, financially, what did that cost you? Like, reparations wise, what did that cost you? And they calculated it to be about $508,000 in US dollars, I should say. Like $500,000 is what they said. This is the cost of healthcare these people needed, suffering, opportunity costs, premature death if people either took their lives early or didn't live as long because they were suffering for other reasons. Horrible. Now, what is the government going to do about this? Well, they said we'll offer a formal apology in November. I'm not sure why they're waiting till November. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but they're going to offer a formal apology. I don't know what that's going to really do, but okay. The commission also made 138 recommendations. Like, here's how we can move forward from this now that we've documented all these horrible things. One of the recommendations was pay the victims. Like, give them the money that you took away from them because of this lack of oversight. And we don't know if the government's actually going to go through with that. That's something I'm sure will be debated over the next several months. Now, there was another thing I wanted to show you as well. Let's talk about religion specifically because why not? I want to talk about that. Here's what the report found about the larger religious groups that were involved in care. Uh, for example, the Catholic Church. One of the things they found is that the Catholic Church failed to address or prevent abuse. No surprise there. They actually said as many as 40. Oh, let me show you this. This is from a Catholic news outlet, Crux. The report said as many as 42% of those in faith based care by all denominations were abused. 42% of people who thought they were going to be cared for by a religious institution were abused. The Catholic Church in New Zealand itself said in 2020, when they were speaking with the commission, that accusations of abuse had been made against 14% of its New Zealand clergy during those 70 years. 14% of priests and other Catholic leaders were accused of abuse. At that point, when it's 14%, you cannot blame one bad priest, one bad apple. No, no, no. The whole orchard is rotten, right? This is not a single individual. This is not a handful of priests. This is not one era when the Catholic Church did wrong. Like, it is systemic. And of course, with the Catholic Church, this has been happening worldwide for a long time. Like, every country that investigates the Catholic Church and all the dioceses, they all find the same basic thing. Like, don't leave your kids alone with the priest, right? In fact, according to the report, several priests who were convicted, not charged, not accused, convicted of sexual abuse, they were sent by the church to Australia or Papua New Guinea. Basically, they were allowed to start fresh in a place where their crimes were not known. How disturbing is that? This is what one person who, I want to get his name right here, Arun Soma, who is an advisor for the commission, said all this. Here we go. Soma said New Zealand's care system is broken. Survivors want to see a total overhaul and fundamental change to ensure that this national catastrophe does not continue. He also said faith-based institutions should exit the business of care. Wow. And in their pastoral care, adopt national standards and transparent complaint processes. That is a bold statement to make. Either get out because we can't trust you to handle the most vulnerable people in our society. But if you're going to care for them, since we can't ask you to have any standards, adopt ours and have a way for people to complain that is transparent so that we know you're actually taking care of people. Like, that's the sort of thing you hear from atheists, not from someone working for the government. So that's interesting. Now, in response to all this, Catholic church officials said they're reviewing the report and they will respond after they're done reading it. All 3,000 pages. Like, I'm sure they will. Now, that's the Catholic Church. The other group that was investigated specifically were the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they did not fare any better. In fact, the Jehovah's Witnesses actually went to court to try to stop the 64-page section about them from being made public. And the court said, yeah, no, it's definitely going to be made public. Like, they just lost that battle like last week. And so we got to see the 64-page report into the Jehovah's Witnesses. And let me show you some of the stuff they did not want you to see. I'm going to skip around here because it's 64 pages. But look at this in the report. This is, again, from the report about the Jehovah's Witnesses. Several factors within the faith increase the risk of abuse occurring during the period, including the status of elders, the power and influence they exercise, particularly over children and young people. The faith had high barriers to the disclosure of abuse, making it more difficult for individuals to say anything. These barriers included, there's more, included the inferior position of women within the faith. Let's just pause there for a second. They see women as below them, which means if a woman comes forth with an allegation that she is being abused, they just wouldn't take it as seriously. How damning is that? The barriers included rigid disclosure processes, like all this paperwork you have to do to be taken seriously. The fear of being shunned and the relative disconnection from non-Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a process called disfellowshipping. People said, if I speak out against this, I could be kicked out of the witnesses. And if I get kicked out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, if they disfellowship me, their rule is that members of their group cannot have communication with you. Like, you are shunned. It is a horrible, horrible thing. Maybe Owen, the Telltale Atheist, he's made a lot of videos about this. But if you are ever eager to go down a rabbit hole, go search for the term disfellowshipping, and you will hear some horror stories about the trauma that it inflicted on people. They were separated from their families. Maybe a child left the Jehovah's Witnesses, and at some point, they grew up, they had kids, and they cannot show those kids to the grandmother because grandmother is still a JW. So, like, they literally have no connection with their families. So anyway, all of these things likely prevented or delayed victims from disclosing abuse. There was also inadequate vetting of elders and insufficient training in preventing or responding to abuse. Like, that's just disturbing. All of these things were making it worse. One thing you didn't see in that particular paragraph, but they mentioned this elsewhere in the document, is the existence of the two witness rule that the JWs have in place. And what that means is, if someone says, I've been a victim of abuse, church elders are basically taught, yeah, well, no one cares, unless there was another person who can admit you were abused as well. Gotta have two witnesses to the abuse. But think about how messed up that is, because in most of these situations, it is the victim and it's the abuser. And if all you've got is the victim's words, well, that's only one witness because the abuser's not going to testify against himself. And so in a lot of cases, there were not two witnesses. So a lot of the allegations were just ignored. So the report pointed out that the two witness rule also made it harder for people to report abuse. This is another section. This was surprising to me. This is also in the 64-page report here. The Jehovah's Witnesses' approach to this inquiry and to its activities was premised on the basis that no children or young people were ever in its care. Just sit with that one for a second. Like, the commission wanted to speak with the Jehovah's Witness leaders, and Jehovah's Witnesses came into it saying, you're investigating abuse in care. Well, guess what? We never took care of anybody. We didn't have any young people that we were watching over. We don't run a daycare. So, like, hands off. Stay away from us. And the thing is, no, they got young people in their care. Just because it's not like a formal daycare doesn't mean they don't offer care for vulnerable people. Doesn't mean they don't take care of kids under their umbrella. But they just acted like, you shouldn't even be investigating us. What are you doing? And as this report says, the ongoing failure of the faith to recognize that kids and young people were in its care gives the inquiry concern about the faith's overall approach to the safety of children and young people in its care. So that's damning. There's one more part I want to show you in this report about the Jehovah's Witnesses. It involves, like, think about this. In the case of trying to investigate what's going on with the witnesses, they spoke to a lot of victims. They spoke to a lot of survivors of abuse. And one of the people they spoke to gave them very detailed information. And because her name is in the report, I'm going to use it here. I want to show you her story because it's really scary. I'm going to take a drink really quick while I show you this. But I just want you to read through this really quick. Number 65. It's about a woman named Jasmine Grew. One second here. Jasmine Grew told the inquiry that she had disclosed abuse to her mother in 1989 when she was 12 years old. Her mother told the elders of the congregation, as she was expected to do, but she's a woman. Soon after, at a faith meeting, an elder came up to Jasmine and said, "We'd like to speak to you, 12-year-old girl, in the back room." And Jasmine says, I went back into the back room and the elders, male, were there. I had no support, no friend, no mother, nothing. My mother did not know at the time what was happening. And that's just part one. This report goes on later in the thing to give us more about Jasmine. Jasmine Grew said, they put the blame on me. They said I was wearing seductive clothing. She's 12. I was aged from 5 to 8 at the time he was sexually abusing me, but they said she was wearing seductive clothing. Jesus. And wait, there's more here. Look at number 140 in the same report. Do you know how long of a rabbit hole I went reading through this stuff? Oh my God. Witnesses described their experience of judicial committees as emotionally and psychologically abusive in and of themselves, particularly after they had been sexually assaulted or abused. As a 12-year-old, Jasmine Grew was questioned by 3 male elders after she disclosed sexual abuse. So what happened in that back room when she went there? I went into the back room and the elders were there. Okay, we already went through that. They were asking the worst questions you can imagine for someone who was just 12 years old. They asked me, was it hard? As if the abuser's penis wasn't hard, then it must not have been abuse. She's 12. They wanted to know everything. Their questions were inappropriate. At that age, it was a terrifying experience for me. It seemed as abusive as the sexual abuse itself. I was honest, and I told them everything because I had to be honest. I was fearful of the consequences of Armageddon. The 2 words that come to me still now are humiliation and embarrassment. The elders were very intimidating. They made no attempt to support or comfort me in this process. So, her story was sadly typical. JW leaders took care of abuse by talking to minors without their parents present, then used religious threats to get them to shut up about it. And it worked. In her case, that abuse remained a secret for decades. One of the other things this report pointed out, look at number 172 right here. I'm going to show you. The inquiry has not seen any evidence of the Jehovah's Witnesses referring sexual abuse allegations to police during the 70-year period. They didn't report any of this to secular authorities. Just disgusting. I want to show you one more thing about this, which is that I said this is a 3,000-page report. Well, one of the sections was about the future. Now that the investigators have all this information on what happened, why it happened, and all that, what should they do about it now? So there was a whole section about the future. And they offered recommendations. And I just want to show you, what the recommendations are for religious institutions, because obviously they don't have much that they're allowed to do. You can't tell the Catholic Church, you are forced to do the following. They don't have that authority because religion. And so this is the recommendations they give for the religious organizations specifically. Check this out. Recommendation number 3, public acknowledgments and apologies for historical abuse and neglect in the care of the state and faith-based institutions should be made to survivors. Who should be apologizing here? Well, let's see. The Pope should make a public apology and acknowledgement for the abuse and neglect in the care of the Catholic Church. The Archbishop of Canterbury. The moderator of the Presbyterian Church of New Zealand. The chief executive officer of each Presbyterian support organization. General of the Salvation Army. The overseeing shepherd. And the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. All of you, can you all just say you're sorry? Because that's the only thing we can ask you to do. It's a recommendation. Even if they said that, what is that going to accomplish? I mean, I'm not the victim here. I'm not a survivor. So look, if it brings some sort of closure to the people who are victims of all this, then fine, please apologize. But right now, it seems like many of these religious institutions are just trying to wipe their hands clean of all of this. Now, in addition to asking them to apologize, the faith-based groups were also asked to consider working with an agency that actually deals with safety, or maybe work with oversight bodies, but they can't force the religious groups to do that. So there's no teeth to that. I mean, I think if anything, the big takeaway from all this is you're not going to convince the Catholic Church to do the right thing. They never have. So publicly shame them. That's what this report does. It publicly shames the Catholic Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses, all these organizations that were overseeing care, and just allowed this abuse to fester. That may have a bigger impact than anything else. Just putting their names out there saying these groups are bad for you. This is what they did. Here's the documentation if you dare to read it. Like, people should know their families may not be safe in a faith-based environment, and their leaders have a long-standing habit of denying that abuse even exists. Like, it's better to avoid religious groups entirely than put your kids at risk. So I don't know what this report will accomplish, but if nothing else for the religious groups, it at least blasted them publicly, which is nice. You have to see that. Even if no arrests are getting made right now or anything, it's important to put it out there that people are worse off because they put their lives, their kids' lives, under the care of these religious institutions.